Anarcho-capitalism.
Yep, I'm finally doing it. A response to what is easily the most requested video that I've had since I've opened my channel. Sorry it's taken so long to get around to it, guys.
Is a fundamentally flawed ideology. It is an interesting ideology in that if you listen to them, it certainly serves as a good way of weaning yourself off the addiction to government. Down below, I'm going to link to a series of videos by Fringe Elements called Anti-Statism at Light Speed. And he does a great job explaining how all of these services that we normally assume only the government can provide can be provided by the private market. However, as an overweening scheme to guide society, it's fundamentally flawed.
So what I find hilarious is that this video is titled Anarcho-Capitalism's Fatal Conceit, yet at the very beginning of the video, as he introduces his premise, he himself introduces his own fatal conceit. He acknowledges the fact that all services can be provided voluntarily, yet he still supports the existence of a state, even though there's no practical need for a state, even according to his own point of view. So right off the bat, there goes the minarchist angle of claiming that governments are necessary to provide some programs or that they're necessary for a social framework. Bad arguments aside, that's not the point. It's pretty obvious he mentioned this to try and create a false sense of impartiality, but by doing this, he's only left himself two possible justifications for the state. Either A, he believes that statist economics can produce better outcomes than the private sector, which is demonstrably false in every metric, and the reason why is because governments don't have any incentive or marginal utility, since they can get more money by simply demanding that people give it to them. Or B, he's an authoritarian sycophant who probably has some sort of boot fetish. Because all he's left himself by taking that position is to try and justify why people should be forced to support the centralization of services which could be provided voluntarily. And I know his position is neither of the aforementioned options, but he's put himself in a place where he has to take those positions or his position falls apart due to inconsistency.
And I'm going to explain this to you through 3 steps. First, the argument from history, the argument from Skyhook, and then the argument from structuralism, followed up by the natural results of what happens if you follow an anarcho-capitalist ideology all the way through. So for the argument from history, let's start off by quoting what Moldbug said about libertarianism. See, the thing about libertarians is that the idea is so blindingly obvious that just about everybody with a decent university-level IQ figures out libertarianism by the age of 22 or 23. It's so obvious, it's so easy to arrive at that conclusion, and yet, when have we ever seen a truly libertarian society?
I see. Could you make me a cup of tea, please, Stephanie?
Oh my god, I thought I killed this meme of an argument in my Tom Hartman debate. Well, aside from the fact that this argument assumes a point which is factually inaccurate, as both governments with a night watchman state have existed, such as medieval Iceland, and stateless individualist societies, such as ancient Ireland, Cospire, or neutral Morsnet, have also existed. But even if we didn't have actual examples to point to, this would still be flawed reasoning because it's based entirely on a circular argument. Please, statists, I really do want to see some challenging arguments against libertarianism. I genuinely want to think about the videos that I'm sent. But if you keep making arguments like this, or what about the roads, or my greater good, you're just gonna keep looking like a bunch of spurging retards. And I don't want that, and I know you don't want that. So guys, can you please stop making these lol-cow arguments and actually think about the things you're gonna say?
The United States came close for a while during the 20 years after its rebellion, but it didn't last and it quickly devolved into the modern form of democracy.
Hence the inherent problem with libertarianism in a state society. The state is an entity which inherently violates your rights by necessity to exist, which minarchists happily concede to because they believe it's necessary. But states only have one aim, and that's to take as much as they can from the people in order to fund themselves and expand their influence. And of course, since the state inherently has nothing, it must use violence to steal from the private sector. And states have been known to do this to the point where they end up cannibalizing their entire private sector, which in turn causes society to collapse, the Soviet Union being one of the better examples. My point is that once you set the precedent for a violent monopoly to do whatever it wants to people at its own discretion, how on earth do you think that your society is going to maintain or even create a libertarian framework? The minarchist idea of a society fundamentally requires violence and oppression, and out of this, you think that you can create a society which holds freedom and justice as a virtue, and yet people say that the anarchists are the crazy ones.
Anarcho-capitalism argues very strongly that we would be richer and better off if we just all switched to an anarchist free market system. If we got rid of the government and put everything into a free market, polycentric legal system with, all of us having options. And on the surface, that makes a lot of sense. But where are the anarcho-capitalist societies today? Historically, we have Ireland. And I know others have pointed out that Ireland was very difficult to invade for the British because there was no central government that could be taken out and replaced by the British Crown.
Very difficult is a severe understatement. They were fighting on and off for several hundred years. The British Empire had more troops in it than Ireland had a population, and they were right across the channel from Britain, so the British could easily provide reinforcements. Just to put that into perspective, imagine the American Revolution with a much smaller population in the colonies. Were within a few days of travel by sea from England. The fight went on for multiple generations. This all took place in a time in history where guns were relatively new and were actually pretty dangerous to use because there was a decent chance that they could misfire and blow up in your face even if you were using them correctly, and the American colonists received no help from France. I can't even believe you know about this example and are still arguing for a state on these grounds, because this is an example, if anything, proving that the stateless militia groups are a far more viable means of defense. In fact, many people I've spoken to see Ireland's self-reliance and sustainability, even with such extreme pressure being put onto it, as the turning point of what made them become anarchist, because it proves that statelessness is better when it comes to social defense.
And yet, Britain still won.
Success and longevity are two mutually exclusive traits. I'm just very disappointed that someone like yourself, who's clearly not stupid, is making arguments that sound almost identical to something I'd expect Cenk Uygur to make.
Ireland is part of the empire. And there is still some resistance from the IRA, but keep in mind that it's a religious conflict that's driving this. The fact that the Irish can group around the Irish Church, the Catholic Church, versus the British Protestants is what allows them to have a Schelling point to keep this war going. If you put them as the same religion, if they were all the exact same branch of Christianity, there would be no rebellion.
The IRA and the Norse were fighting the British for entirely different reasons. The Norse wanted their freedom, and most IRA members or supporters probably don't even know about the stateless origins of Ireland. Or if they do, they don't really care about their cause. The biggest difference being that the IRA attempted to establish a state, while the Norse were fighting to avoid statism.
So if anarchism is such a superior system, then we should see it somewhere on the planet. And we don't.
By that line of reasoning, communism shouldn't exist. But it does.
In fact, I'm going to try and explain that in this video.
Oh boy, this ought to be good, especially considering that it's not even true.
So, the argument from Skyhook. Now, many of you have probably heard the word unobtainium. It's a word used by engineers to describe a material or a substance that doesn't exist, but which if it did exist, they could do amazing things with.
Didn't you already acknowledge that stateless societies have existed in the past? You've already debunked this entire section of the video yourself, so we technically could skip this entire argument, but as you all know, I don't do that.
For instance, as things stand right now, we have the engineering capability of building a space elevator. What we don't have is the material science. We cannot make a cable for this elevator that would withstand the forces it would have to. There's been some talk about possibly using spider silk if we could artificially manufacture that. But at present, we don't have the unobtainium. If you want to go even further, there are actually theories for faster than light travel that would work if you had things like matter with negative mass, which according to everything we know doesn't exist. And given that faster than light travel would violate causality principles, probably doesn't exist in the universe.
Terrible analogy. In the past, you would have at least had an argument. Not a very good one, but an argument nonetheless. The reason that you don't anymore is because since the previous stateless societies, we've invented economic decentralization, which can only lead to the abolition of the state since cryptocurrency's blockchain system innovates the need for banking out of existence and makes it impossible to centralize, essentially meaning that since 2008, the only future that mankind can take is statelessness, because eventually there will be an event that will lead to an expansion of the blockchain network, which will increase the value of cryptocurrencies in question, making more people want to get into the market since it's profitable for them, which will only make the currency's value more stable and profitable, which leads to more investment of capital into the counter-economic business cycle, including arbitration services and private security firms, all of which created with a currency that can't be monitored due to its blockchain system. So the government can't really intervene since all of these entrepreneurs, according to the IRS, have nothing. But even before 2008, in his book The New Libertarian Manifesto, Samuel Edward Konkin III explained economic decentralization. So really, the argument from stability or the supposed impracticality of statelessness has been debunked since at least 1986.
And see, anarcho-capitalism is a lot like that. It has this pie-in-the-sky dream. It has this sky castle that it's talked about, this perfect anarcho-capitalist utopia. But it has no method of getting there.
I'm beginning to think that you've never seen a voluntarist conversation before because it's one of the main things we debate about or explain to people who are new hearing about it and asking questions. In fact, if you go to any of my recent videos, you'll find that this is one of the things I find myself explaining the most to opponents.
The fact is that we are here right now, in history, with these institutions, with these histories, bolstering us but also weighing us down. Anarcho-capitalists don't usually talk about, for instance, forming an anarcho-cap society on Mars with all the extremely high IQ scientists that go and colonize it.
That's because our ideas don't center around the colonization of other planets to exist? What the fuck?
No, they're talking about trying to form an anarcho-capitalist society today, in this world, with these institutions. And they have no method of getting there. they have no plan from going from A to B.
Well, that's just an outright lie. I mean, some may not agree with agorism. For example, Mr. Dapperton is a party arc and thinks that you should use the state to try and abolish the state. Yeah, that doesn't really make sense, but that's what he believes, and that's just an example.
But it's a very immature sort of supposition to say that. The thing is that in this world of perfect trust, to bring these characters together and try and get them to trust one another, all it takes is one person lying to exploit the rest. Yes, living in a society of doves would be wonderful, but as soon as you add one hawk to the mix, the hawk dominates. This is basic game theory.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
How many fucking times are statists going to make this straw man argument? The non-aggression principle does not require ideological hegemony, or for no one to violate it. It's an observation that by applying logic consistently, you can find that certain actions are inherently impossible to justify and therefore cannot be considered ethical. This doesn't assume that no one will perform these unethical behaviors, or that even everyone will follow the non-aggression principle, only that it's not possible for someone to justify their actions if they perform the said unethical behavior. This is also known as Lysander Spooner's natural law, but it's commonly referred to as the non-aggression principle because the main note it makes is that it's impossible to justify any coercive action, since doing so implies an inherent double standard, since to coerce someone and for you to be ethically justified would require you to declare that the other person is subject to your dominion over them, which is not an argument that can be made since it's internally inconsistent, although natural law would probably be a more appropriate name for it since certain non-violent actions can't be justified either, such as fraud. No one is arguing, or has ever argued, that a voluntarist anarchy would require ideological hegemony. Just imagine for a moment that you snatch an old lady's purse and you are stopped, taken into an arbitration service to justify your actions. How do you justify this? You can't argue that ethics don't exist because that's a self-contradicting line of reason. You can't use logic to argue that logic is subjective because merely arguing this implies that you believe in logical objectivity. You can't argue that the lady doesn't have a right to her property because she obtained that property through a voluntary exchange and is therefore entitled to it as an extension of her self-ownership as an individual. You can't argue that you can't be held accountable for your own actions because that creates a double standard, you having the ability to initiate force against others but nobody can do anything to you. You simply can't defend your actions here, and that's all we're saying. If you go to an arbitration service and you perform these actions, you will be held criminally liable because you cannot justify them.
Following from that is the argument from structure. McLuhan once said that the medium is the message, that the way you communicate something is what you're communicating. Have you ever seen a television show that made fun of watching television and how idiotic and disingenuous the whole thing is? That's what he was talking about. But on a broader level, the structure of something is that thing. Imagine trying to make a political party to get rid of democracy.
Oh, so you acknowledge that voluntarists have proposed methods to achieve a stateless society. Congratulations, you just completely contradicted your second point.
The very nature of forming a political party and seeking out the populist mandate is being part of democracy. Participating in democracy strengthens democracy.
Hence why I and most others oppose partyarchy and instead support counter-economics. Hey Mr. Dapperton, if you're watching this, feel free to make your own response to this video, because I'm sure that there are some people in my audience who'd like to see one, since I'm not really going to be defending this position. Alright, well I'm stopping here since he doesn't go on to present anything new from this point onward. He goes on to try and make some stupid comparison between voluntarists and religious fundies by claiming that we're all utopians, but I already refuted that. So anyway, I guess I'll see you all later. By the way, to celebrate getting 1,000 subscribers, again, I'm hosting another Q&A. And, yeah, starting from here until I get 1,000 subscribers, everyone, leave your questions that you want me to address in the Q&A. All you have to do is comment below in my videos, and there's a chance that I will address your comment. Okay, let's see here. Finish this up real quick. Oh wait, probably should fucking go back real quick and add this in here. Oh no. No. Don't fucking tell me all the models are resized. Oh my god.
What a wonderful world.